I had an arranged marriage. My father-in-law is a successful president who runs several supermarkets. My mother-in-law is quirky and taciturn. The miscarriage led to a cooling relationship between my husband and me and his affair. The quirky mother-in-law saved me when I was devastated. My name is Sarah. I'm 33 years old. I married 10 years ago and have been living with my husband's parents and my husband. We don't have children. My husband, Brad, and I were married through an arranged marriage. At that time, I was living with my parents and brother, a family of 4. My family has lived in the area for generations. And my father was the president of the neighborhood association. As a result, we often had requests for help or advice. One day, a so-called matchmaker lady, who enjoys connecting men and women, came to consult us. It's something you don't hear much about these days. She was looking for a bride for the only son of a local supermarket chain owner. I was serving coffee and snacks, thinking it was none of my business. So I was surprised when my father suddenly turned to me and said, "Hey, Sarah. How about you try meeting him?" Indeed, I had never dated a man, and after graduating from community college, I didn't find a job but helped with household chores instead. That was because the household chores were too much for my mother alone due to the frequent visitors. I learned various household tasks, including cooking, thoroughly from my mother. My hobbies are cooking, reading, and handicrafts. Being an indoor, plain, and shy girl. My father might have been worried that it would be difficult for me to meet men in the future. The son of the supermarket founder who owns several stores, right? He's 30 years old, isn't that a good match? Why don't you meet him at least? He's quite a good man. He showed me a matchmaking photo. Nowadays, they call it a dating profile picture. Indeed, the photo looked sincere and likable. More importantly, he resembled my favorite actor. Even the matchmaker lady said Sarah would be perfect for him. A great match. Without listening to my opinion, she half forced me to go to a photo studio to take a matchmaking photo. I tried to say, but she interrupted. If you don't like it, you can refuse after meeting him, making me feel pressured to comply. Even my mother said, "It's fine. If you don't like it, I'll refuse for you. Go have some delicious food." And she took me shopping for a new dress at the department store. You really don't care about men or makeup. Your father is worried about you, she told me. The following year, it was decided that my father would retire as the president of the neighborhood association and my brother would get married and his bride would live with us. My parents were worried that I would have no place in our home. They thought it would be better for someone like me to marry and be happy. On the day of the meeting, I had my hair done at the salon, got my makeup done, and wore the dress my mother and I chose. I looked like a different person. "You look much more beautiful than in the photo," said the matchmaking partner, Brad, who resembled Bradley Cooper. It's unfair to even have a similar name. The matchmaker lady was rapidly introducing us, but I hardly listened. Then I heard, "You two make a wonderful couple," for the first time. I didn't know people really said that, I said, surprised. Well, I don't think it's said much nowadays. She's an old-fashioned matchmaker. Brad laughed. His smile was charming. And I wondered why such a man would choose to marry through an arranged meeting. Perhaps it showed on my face because Brad explained. That lady is a childhood friend of my father. Knowing I was 30 and still unmarried, she nagged about arranging a meeting. My father said it was just to fulfill a duty once. But I'm glad I came because you are a wonderful person. Hearing that, I couldn't help but say, "Me too." It was a bit frustrating to go along with the matchmaker's plan. But Brad and I decided to get married. The wedding and reception were grand, with many guests invited. And our honeymoon was in Europe. Life at my new home began after a whirlwind of dreamlike days. My father-in-law was a robust, cheerful man who seemed dependable. My mother-in-law was taciturn, rarely spoke, and often kept to her room. I was surprised to learn that it's common for a housewife to have her own room in such a large house. I was also surprised when my mother-in-law told me right after I moved in, "I'm not good at household chores, so I'll leave them to you. We have a cleaning service come twice a week." I had assumed that after getting married, I would be meticulously instructed by my mother-in-law on how to cook and clean, according to the ways of their house. True to her word, my mother-in-law never interfered with the household chores. She ate the meals I prepared without a single complaint, and would retreat to her room after finishing her meal. I didn't feel disliked because occasionally, around 3 p.m., she would make tea and we would enjoy delicious sweets she ordered, just the two of us. Tea should be made with boiling water. Wait until the tea leaves fully open. The tea she made was very fragrant and delicious. Usually quiet, my mother-in-law would talk quite a bit during these times. "What do you usually do in your room, mother?" I dared to ask her. "I do some research on the computer, read books, and watch movies." She was a completely different type of person from my mother, who was always busy taking care of others and doing household chores. "Do you think it's luxurious for a housewife to have her own room?" It was as if she read my mind and asked me. "It used to be my husband's room, but he's a bit of a loner and said he had nothing to do by himself in his room. So he was always in the living room. So, I decided to take it over." She smiled kindly as she said this, making me grow fond of my somewhat quirky mother-in-law. A year into our calm and happy marriage, I became pregnant. My husband, in-laws, and my own family were delighted, probably marking the happiest time of my life. However, shortly after sharing the news with everyone, I miscarried. The doctor said early miscarriages are common and not to worry too much as I was still young. My husband, in-laws, and my family comforted me, but I was deeply shocked. I had thought it was natural for a married woman to get pregnant and have children. It was only when I found myself in this situation that I learned some couples can't have children. And there are many problems with pregnancy and childbirth. "I'm sorry, father, mother." I apologized them. "Why are you apologizing? You're the one who's suffering the most," my mother-in-law said, embracing me with kindness that felt like salvation. I saw many stories online and in magazines about women who had successful pregnancies after miscarriages. So, I thought it would be okay for me too. I believed I would get pregnant again soon. But time passed, and I struggled to conceive, growing more anxious. Looking back, I think I became obsessed with getting pregnant. I wanted to make up for my failure, not to be called a defective wife who couldn't have children. I was driven by these ugly emotions. It's no wonder my husband began to avoid our conjugal duties, which had become an obligation. I never imagined he would have an affair. I didn't suspect anything when I found a receipt from an expensive restaurant in his suit pocket, or even when I found an earring in his car that clearly wasn't mine. I noticed he was frequently texting someone, but I couldn't bring myself to voice my suspicions. Around that time, my father-in-law suffered a stroke. He survived but was left with paralysis on one side of his body and had to retire from work. My husband took over as president of the company. For a while, he held the title of acting president. My mother-in-law and I were left to care for my father-in-law at home. "If it weren't for you, Sarah, we would have had to put him in a facility." While saying that, my mother-in-law was diligently caring for him. At that moment, I felt that there was love between this couple. In contrast, what about us, my husband and me? After 10 years of marriage, we now sleep in separate bedrooms. And we hardly even talk, let alone have a marital relationship. Since my husband took over as president, he has started to stay out more often, citing his busy schedule. When he does come home, he complains. This house is so gloomy. A father with half-body paralysis, a weird mother, and a gloomy wife, it's just uncomfortable. Recently, I became certain that my husband was having an affair. He doesn't even try to hide it, openly talking to the other woman on the phone at home. He pretends it's a business call, but it's obvious from his expression that it's not. Where did I go wrong? If only I hadn't miscarried. I know it's useless to think like that now. But was it wrong to become so desperate to get pregnant afterward? Was it wrong not to confront my husband when I first suspected his affair? By the time I realized it, it felt like it was too late to turn things around. One day, I unfolded a piece of paper from the breast pocket of my husband's suit, which he said he wore on a business trip. It was a child's drawing of a father, seemingly done by a child around 4 to 5 years old. I nearly collapsed as darkness seemed to envelop me. The drawing, with a "Daddy" written in a childlike letter, deeply hurt me. Hey. What are you doing, snooping around like a thief? My husband entered the room and coldly spoke to me. Ah, I see. That kid must have put it there without me knowing. Kids, you know, can't help it. Seeing the paper I was holding, my husband said it without a hint of remorse. You knew, didn't you? That I have another woman. I knew. But I didn't know about the child. The existence of a child he had with someone else devastated me. A child we couldn't have together. Yeah, kids are cute. You're pretty much like a maid now, so it's fine if you leave. I'll pay you a settlement or something. It seemed my husband intended to remarry his affair partner if I divorced him. Since there was already a child involved, maybe that would be better for this family. The next morning, as I was preparing breakfast with swollen eyes from crying, my husband clicked his tongue and left for work without eating. After cooling my swollen face to make it somewhat presentable, I went to see my father-in-law and felt embarrassed when I saw John, who seemed surprised by my appearance. John has been the secretary to my father-in-law. More of a personal secretary than a company one, a man in his mid-40s. I've known him since I married into the family 10 years ago, but I've never seen John laugh. He's always been impeccably polite and unflappable. Then, I will take my leave now. John said this, as usual, bowed, and left. I gathered my courage and shared what I had thought about the night before with my in-laws. There's no need for Sarah to leave. My mother-in-law said this without changing her expression. But it was our son who broke the rules first. You've done nothing wrong. Let's say, it's 8-2. No, 9-1 our son's fault. But we couldn't have children. That doesn't matter. You're a good daughter-in-law. Besides, if you leave, taking care of him by myself would be too hard. I glanced over and saw my father-in-law nodding in agreement. Can I stay in this house? Of course. If you want to leave, I won't stop you. Choose for yourself. Choose for myself. Always being swept along, doing as I was told, and pretending not to notice even when I had something to say, I lived my life. I want to stay here. For the first time, I felt like I could clearly express my own will. 6 months later, my father-in-law suffered another stroke in his sleep and passed away. My mother-in-law did not let her son take charge of the funeral, but remained firm and took on the role herself. My husband dealt with the condolence visitors with a solemn face, but he didn't seem very saddened. A little after my father-in-law's death, I noticed something odd about my mother-in-law. Instead of secluding herself in her room upstairs, she often sat on the living room sofa, staring blankly at the TV. She wouldn't change the channel, just watched whatever was on. not even laughing at comedy shows. Seeing his mother like this, my husband said, loud enough for her to hear. Dad dies and she goes senile. Great, just great. How can you say that? Aren't you worried? I challenged him, and his response was shocking. Instead of that, you're still here even after Dad's care is no longer needed. What, after the inheritance? I was saddened because I had never thought of such a thing. Then, my mother-in-law tried to go out to the garden, fell at the entrance, and severely sprained her ankle. She needed a wheelchair to move around the house, which was spacious enough to avoid hitting anything. But it wasn't designed with accessibility in mind. I had to lift the wheelchair over small steps, and my husband, upon seeing this after returning from work, did not offer help but said, "A sprain? Now that she can't walk, she'll go even more senile. I'm not dealing with any caregiving, so you're up until the old lady kicks it." That made me snap. What's wrong with you? Is that something a son should say? Yeah. You keep scoring points. I'll give you a bit of the inheritance, so work hard. With that, he left, probably back to his mistress and child. I was so angry and frustrated I felt like crying. Then, suddenly, my mother-in-law burst into laughter. What? Mother? What happened? For a moment, I thought she had really lost her mind. Then, she spoke clearly. Ridiculous. Such a foolish son. I've made up my mind. Let's start by selling the house. What? She pulled out her smartphone from her pocket and called John. As I was bewildered, not understanding what was happening, she said, "Sorry, Sarah. It's true I was feeling down since my husband passed away. But I wasn't going senile. I was just thinking. But, you didn't react at all to the TV. That's because it wasn't interesting." John arrived with documents in hand. Since Brad became acting president, the company's performance has been poor. Not just in sales across stores, but also employee morale has dropped. The main reason is the withdrawal of Hillary and the president from management. But Brad's spending habits are also a significant concern. He showed some data to my mother-in-law. Hillary is her name. What does that mean? I blurted out the question, and John's surprising answer came. The real manager of our company was Hillary. The company grew significantly thanks to the president's popularity and Hillary's management skills. And thanks to you, John. You compensated for what we lacked as a couple. So, the reason you stayed in her room was, I can view all the store data and surveillance camera footage from the computer in my room. It's true I also read books and watched movies. But why? Couldn't you have been the vice president or something? Because I'm not cut out to be a leader. Saying this, my mother-in-law looked off into the distance. I think she saw my late father-in-law in her mind's eye. I've come to understand Brad's true nature and intentions. He's not fit to run the company. I have no intention of passing on the land or the house to him. John, would you like to become the president? Is it really so easy to hand over the role of president? No, I'm like you, I'm not cut out to lead others. That's troublesome. Then, Sarah, you become the president. What? I couldn't understand what she was saying. It's unthinkable for me, with no corporate experience, to suddenly become president. When I said that, don't worry, John will support you. I have a good eye for people. Sarah, you have a charm that makes people want to support you. That's enough to be a president. With your kindness and attention to detail, and the current trend of welcoming female executives, you'll be fine, even John said so. But what about her real son? When I said that, another shocking fact was revealed. That child is not my real son. My in-laws were unable to have children. At a time when infertility treatments were not as advanced as they are now. Infertility was often seen as the woman's fault. And my mother-in-law suffered a lot because of this. In the end, the problem was with my husband. But by the time we found out, I was already over 40. So we adopted a child from a distant relative with many children. Brad was already 5 years old when he came to this house, so he should know. Is that why he can behave so terribly, because he's not their real son? I said I have a good eye for people. But I guess I don't understand children. Oh dear, that means I raised him wrong. My mother-in-law said this with a wry smile. Anyway, Brad is a failure both as a businessman and as a family man. Including evidence of his affairs, John has gathered enough irrefutable evidence. That child will have to leave both the company and this house. I believed that what my mother-in-law said would indeed happen. John, sell this place as soon as possible. I want to live in an apartment, preferably a high-rise. But living in New York at this age seems too much. So the high-rise apartments near the station here will do. Climbing stairs is too much trouble when you're old. Then, the reason you've been in the living room lately is... Part of it is because I stepped back from management. But also because there's only one toilet on the first floor. It's hard when you're old and need the toilet frequently. My mother-in-law said this with a bit of a sulk. I found it somewhat endearing. So? Sarah, will you take the role of president or not? I'll do it. I blurted out my answer without thinking. This might be a big opportunity. A chance to change my personality, my life. On the day of my inauguration as president, my husband, Brad, barged in, furious. What the hell is this? What's going on? I suddenly got a call from John yesterday, went to the house, and it's being demolished. I'm the president, right? This woman being president is some kind of joke. He yelled loudly in front of the employees. You were only ever acting president. Based on the company's performance during your tenure and the feedback from employees. It was judged that the company could not prosper under your leadership. I said this without changing my facial expression. The result of practicing in front of a mirror the night before. And the expensive suits you had tailored. The night spent squandering at high-end clubs. That was all with company money. We could sue you for embezzlement. Surprised and mocking laughter rose from the employees. Damn it. You'll pay for this. Brad, leaving behind a line like a villain from a movie, fled the scene. I apologize for the unpleasant scene. I may not have the knowledge or experience. But I hope to make this a better company with your support. Please, lend me your strength. As I bowed, warm applause filled the room. When I left the venue, my husband was waiting outside. Hey. What's the joke here? What happened to the house? That house and this company are mine, right? Or they would be once the old lady kicks the bucket. Violence is not the answer. As my husband grabbed me by the collar and yelled, John twisted his arm and intervened. Ouch. Let go. What do you think you're doing? You're just a secretary. Even an Amir secretary is far more capable than a former foolish son. My mother-in-law, having recovered from her sprain, walked up firmly on her own and spoke. The house and land have already been sold. And there's no place for you in this company. You've been my son for a long time, so you'll get your legal share of the inheritance. Use that money to start over somewhere else. Inspired by my mother-in-law's assertive demeanor, I said, here's the divorce papers. I thrust the divorce documents at him. And then John added one last thing. Oh, by the way, it seems that the child of your mistress is not your son. Perhaps you should check? What? No way. That's not possible. Leaving my stunned ex-husband behind, we left the scene. Later, I heard from John that after confronting his mistress, she readily confessed, and he kicked her out. John told me that my ex-husband, now alone, was spending his days drowned in alcohol despite having received an inheritance that could have opened a new store. Hearing this from John, I felt no sympathy at all. The view from the top floor is really something, isn't it? Looking out at the night view from the large windows of our new high-rise apartment, my mother-in-law spoke. The apartment had commercial facilities on the first and second floors, including a supermarket, bookstore, flower shop, hospital, and even a veterinary clinic. By the way, the supermarket is a slightly upscale one that we have newly launched. It would be perfect if Sarah and John ended up together. Then I'd have no regrets. Once again, my mother-in-law mentioned something outrageous. Oh, Hillary. Things don't always go as you say. Right, John? Indeed, Hillary. Really, you're too much. I'm already 45, and Sarah is just 35. Looking at John, who had turned a bit red, mother-in-law pressed on. Oh, come on. A 10-year difference is nothing. Your father and I had about the same gap. John, you've always been concerned about Sarah whenever you came over. That was because Brad's behavior was just too terrible. Seeing John flustered like that for the first time was a new experience. 3 years later, much to my chagrin, or rather, to my delight, my mother-in-law's predictions came true. I said I'd have no regrets, but I ended up having one. I got to see my grandchild's face. Saying so, my mother-in-law lifted a newborn girl into her arms. Though technically, the baby isn't related by blood. Now my husband, John, added something unnecessary. That doesn't matter at all. You and Sarah are my precious son and daughter. Holding her granddaughter, my mother-in-law smiled warmly. I was truly glad to have met her. In my heart, I deeply felt this.
I spent $200,000. Kenny, who didn't even attend my mother's funeral, had unexpectedly flown abroad. $200,000? What on earth did you do with such a sum? You remember that grand piano we had at home? I sold it. Man, coming from a wealthy family sure had its perks. That was a fine piano. I never imagined it would fetch $200,000. It seems Kenny mistakenly thought that the grand piano at home was his. My condolences. The inheritance rights to the family estate are all mine. However, that piano was originally bought by our grandfather for my brother, and it still belongs to him. My brother, who's always loved the piano and now works as a piano teacher, left it at our family home because it was too big for his house. Given my brother's strong sense of ownership, he would be furious to know that something of his had been sold without his consent. Knowing my brother, simply compensating him won't be enough. When I told Kenny this, he hung up immediately. My name is Rachel Schneider. I'm a 45-year-old office worker. My family has a distinguished lineage that dates back to colonial times and is well known in our community. Moreover, thanks to my late father's successful business, we now own assets worth $9 million. Originally, my older brother was supposed to inherit the family estate. However, he had a girlfriend from a family that also required an heir. Desiring to marry her at all costs, he declared that he would give up all inheritance rights in exchange for not taking over the family responsibilities. This left me with the challenge of needing to find a spouse to continue the family name. Even though I had always wanted to be independent without relying on family wealth, I focused solely on my career. Before I realized, I found myself in my mid-40s and still single. I needed to find someone, or our family line would end with me. So, I took a leap of faith and attended a singles mixer. That's where I met my current husband. His name is Kenny, and he's surprisingly 10 years younger than me. Yet, at the party, he didn't pay attention to any of the younger women and came straight to me. You sure you want to be with someone as old as me? I asked him repeatedly, but Kenny looked straight into my eyes and answered. I'm a bit shy and not very assertive. I've always been drawn to older, more grounded women. True to his words, Kenny gave off a gentle, reserved vibe. I felt that he could bring some peace to my assertive family dynamics. As our relationship progressed, there was something I had to tell him. My mother had been bedridden due to illness since last year, and I was taking turns with my sister-in-law, Catherine, to care for her. Wondering how to break the news since we were considering marriage given our age, I finally told him on our third date. He gladly accepted and even proposed to me, saying he'd like to help with the caregiving. I was deeply touched by his kindness. At least, that's how I felt in the beginning. Kenny works as a daycare teacher. However, 4 months into our marriage, he suddenly wanted to quit his job. When I asked why, he replied with a remorseful look. Sorry, Rachel. The parents at my daycare are just too demanding and complaining a lot. I just can't handle it anymore. Surely, it must have been tough for Kenny, looking so timid. I would have normally said, try a little harder, to encourage him, but with him helping with my mom's care now, I couldn't say a word. Plus, I'm 3 months pregnant now. I want to get along well with Kenny for the sake of the baby on the way. I was showing a lenient face, but I soon regretted it. As I came out of the shower and tried to enter the bedroom, I could hear Kenny whispering on the phone. I was shocked at the content of his call. I managed to get married without her finding out I'm unemployed. She totally believed me when I just told her I quit my job. When in reality, I quit like 2 years ago. It sounded like he was talking to one of his buddies. From the other end, I faintly heard a male voice say, "Man, you're really something." Well, Rachel's family is pretty wealthy around here. I thought I hit the jackpot when I saw her at that dating event. But then again, given her age, I was probably the only one to approach her. I felt deceived. Was the gentle Kenny I knew all just an act? I wanted to confront him immediately, but thinking of the baby, I couldn't utter a word. Knowing Kenny's true intentions, I lost confidence in our future. Today, Catherine will be taking care of my mom until 5 p.m., and then I'll take over. I was pondering whether I should confide in someone about Kenny. That's when my brother's wife, Catherine, spoke to me. Rachel, you look down. If something's troubling you, please share it with me. She's such a kind person. Having taken care of her own mom for years, she's really good with mine too. I opened up to her about Kenny. She listened intently to my story. It's good you talked. Keeping this to yourself could have been harmful to your unborn child. Yeah. I'm sorry. No worries. Talking doesn't necessarily solve everything, but it surely lightens the load. Still, this is quite the situation. Catherine looked really concerned, almost as if it was her own problem. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and without waiting for a response, Kenny entered. Both of us were taken aback, but Kenny acted like nothing was amiss and smiled. Rachel, I'm gonna help with your mom's care from today. You're not in the safe period yet, so I don't want you straining yourself. Kenny was putting on the act of a gentleman in front of me. Really? Okay, let me show you how to care for her. No, I'll learn from Catherine. You just rest at home. Well, my brother's coming home early today, so we won't need her help. Upon hearing that, Catherine looked at me, shaking her head as if to say it's okay. She might confront Kenny and get the full story out of him once I'm gone. Thinking that, I decided to leave it to her and head home. But I couldn't help but worry, so I pretended to leave but hid nearby. Catherine tried to start a conversation with Kenny, but he spoke first. I've been meaning to ask. Why are you taking care of your mother-in-law in this house? He was using the same tone he used on the phone. Well, my husband's busy and can't make it, and Rachel has her job. But more importantly, why are you asking? Then, Kenny exclaimed, "What?" and began to say horrible things to Catherine. You live in such a wealthy home, you'd have enough money to put your mother-in-law in a care facility, wouldn't you? Or is it something else? Did your husband give up his claim to this family's wealth, so you're trying to curry favor by taking care of her? That must be it. You'd be pretty upset if you married into money and didn't get a piece of the inheritance, wouldn't you? That's just cruel. I too was so angered by Kenny's harsh words that I wanted to leave the room. However, as I was about to, Catherine, noticing me, signaled with her eyes not to. I reluctantly stayed quiet and just watched the scene unfold. You hit a nerve, didn't you? If so, leave right now. This family's wealth belongs to us, my wife and me. So, I'll take care of my mother-in-law by myself from now on. With that attitude from Kenny, Catherine felt it was pointless to say anything more and left the scene. I also discreetly stepped outside. She must have been deeply hurt. I wondered how I could apologize to her. Then, Kenny began taking care of Mom all by himself. I offered to help, but Kenny told me I absolutely shouldn't come. He just explained the basics of caregiving. However, his careless caregiving had tragic consequences, and our mother passed away. The funeral was held at a church where generations of our family had been buried. However, from the day Mom passed away, Kenny disappeared. I tried to figure out where he might have gone, but with funeral preparations and other arrangements, I was too occupied. Relatives and neighbors seemed puzzled by Kenny's absence. Catherine, crying in front of the altar, apologized for entrusting Kenny with the caregiving. I approached the distraught Catherine and tried to console her. Catherine, please don't be so hard on yourself. It's our fault, not yours. No, Rachel, it's not your fault. But where on earth is that man? I wanted to give him a piece of my mind today, and he vanishes just as Mom passes away. Exactly. And wasn't Kenny off and out even while he was supposed to be caring for Mom? Where was he going? Yes, according to neighbors, Kenny frequently left the house. He was out so often it didn't seem like he was caregiving at all, more like he was just bumming around. Also, they mentioned a large truck had come by once. What was that truck about? I was curious, but with the funeral going on, I didn't bring it up to anyone. The funeral ended, and even after 3 days, Kenny hadn't returned. Then, I got a call on my cell from Kenny. Hey! Rachel? I'm currently at a luxury hotel in Europe, the kind I saw on a travel show. Kenny's carefree voice came through. What? Kenny, you skipped Mom's funeral and you're doing what now? As I angrily yelled, an unexpected answer came from Kenny. I spent $200,000. $200,000? Where'd you get that kind of money? Remember the grand piano at our family home? I sold it. Man, it was a good one. Who would have thought it'd go for $200,000? Turns out, Kenny had sold the family's grand piano and was using that money to travel around Europe. That piano, which Mom said was a family heirloom, was indeed worth around $200,000. Apparently, the hotels Kenny booked were all quite luxurious, and he had quickly spent all the money. I never dreamt Kenny would do something like this while supposed to be taking care of Mom. Our family home had tight security, but with family, it's a different story. The truck that had been at our home must have been there to transport the piano. Why on earth are you doing something so selfish? The whole family was worried about you since you weren't at the funeral. Well, you know, when you have a kid, you won't have much free time anymore. You have a job, so I guess I gotta be the stay-at-home dad. I was flabbergasted by Kenny's words, forgetting my anger. It's good that he wants to take on child-rearing, but he seems intent on leeching off of me. Moreover, it appears Kenny mistakenly thought that grand piano was mine. I confronted Kenny, who had unknowingly sold the grand piano and splurged with the money, with the words, "My condolences." Huh? What do you mean by that? With Kenny responding in a dumbfounded voice, I explained the details about the grand piano. That piano originally belonged to my grandfather, who bought it for my brother. So, the current owner is still my brother. Oh, is that so? You scared me there. It'll be fine if I just apologize to your brother later, right? Kenny seemed to lack any guilt about selling someone else's belongings. Well, Kenny has only met my brother at our wedding, so it's understandable he's unaware of my brother's intimidating nature. My brother works as a piano teacher. Ever since he was a child, he loved the piano. He pleaded with our grandfather to buy that specific piano. Though currently, there isn't space in his house for it, which is why it's at our parents'. Yet, he's still the owner. While working at a piano school, he has also expressed his wish to start his own school, using that very piano. Piano means more to him than anything else. I can only imagine what kind of punishment he would impose on Kenny after hearing that it was sold without permission. By the way, my brother has a strong personality and hates dishonesty. As I continued explaining, Kenny remained silent throughout. Get it? When he finds out you sold his cherished grand piano, mere compensation won't cut it. My brother's not just strong-willed, but he doesn't settle for compromises either. I wonder what kind of punishment awaits you. With my warning, the phone abruptly hung up. He's probably feeling regretful and is now racking his brains. For now, I called my brother and told him everything about the phone call. Needless to say, he was livid. The next day, Kenny rushed home. Entering from the front door, his eyes widened seeing everyone in the living room.
What? What's going on? Why is everyone here?
I had timed it so that the whole family would gather when Kenny returned home. Of course, my brother and his wife Catherine were there too. With a menacing look, my brother said,
Kenny, I heard everything from Rachel. What were you thinking? Selling someone else's property, especially something that valuable, without consulting the family?
Kenny, visibly nervous, tried to justify himself.
I was just trying to help with the chores around the house out of boredom. When I saw the old, large grand piano, I thought no one was using it anymore.
So you decided to sell it?
Yes, I mean, it seemed like a waste just to leave it there.
My brother, with a stern expression, asked.
Really? That piano was special, imported by our grandfather from a top European manufacturer.
Where's the money from the sale? As expected, my brother is quite the actor. Everyone probably knows that Kenny blew all his money on an overseas trip, but he's trying to make him confess it in front of everyone. Kenny must be desperately thinking of an excuse. He doesn't respond immediately and seems lost in thought. The sales money, yeah. It hasn't come in yet. In a flustered manner, Kenny tried to make an excuse, but my brother's anger finally erupted.
You're lying. Just how rotten are you? For starters, what's with those souvenirs from Europe in that huge suitcase?
Kenny acted as if he'd been struck by lightning, closing his eyes and shrinking back.
I'm sorry. I used up all the money.
Hearing Kenny's words, all the relatives began murmuring. Everyone knows the value of that grand piano. Everyone was shocked that he could spend $200,000 on just one overseas trip. My brother, looking down at Kenny, lifted his chin with his hand, making eye contact and said,
I think you already know from Rachel, but that piano was mine. Now that it's gone, you're gonna pay back every single penny. If you can't, I'm gonna sue you for theft. You okay with that?
My brother was confronting Kenny with immense intensity. He almost seemed like a mob boss. Normally, this would just be a family dispute, not something to sue over. But my brother is probably intimidating Kenny, who's clueless about the law. Just as my brother expected, Kenny lost his voice and started sweating profusely. Then, with a frightened voice, he looked at me.
Rachel, please, help me.
He pleaded in such a pitiful voice. What does he expect me to do?
I have nothing to do with this. It's all you're doing.
When I shot him down, Kenny began saying something ridiculous.
Don't be so cold. I took care of your mom while you were pregnant. I just thought of the trip as a reward for myself after taking care of her. Let's just say we both decided to sell the piano. That way, since we're siblings, it won't be theft, right?
What? I was so dumbfounded, I couldn't close my open mouth. The one who came to my rescue was Catherine.
Enough is enough. Didn't you tell Rachel not to come for caregiving? You even told me you thought I was just after the inheritance and tried to drive me away. What? Kenny, did you say such awful things to my wife too?
Yes. I didn't want to worry you, so I kept quiet. But this man must have been plotting to secretly sell the piano without letting Rachel and me get close to the family home. Catherine's words made sense to me. Recalling that Kenny didn't let me come close to the family home when he said he'd take care of our parents alone, I came to the same conclusion. My brother's anger peaked again.
Listen up. The reason my wife took care of Mom was because she didn't want to go to a facility. My wife had experience caring for her own mother, so she kindly agreed to do it for mine. Money is a later issue. First, apologize to my wife right here, right now.
While being grabbed by the collar by my brother, Kenny, with tears in his eyes, knelt down in front of Catherine. I'm so sorry, Catherine. Though Kenny apologized for his insulting behavior towards Catherine, all the relatives looked at him with cold eyes. Then, one of the relatives shouted at Kenny.
You better pay back the money from the piano sale as soon as possible. We can't have a criminal in the family. It'll tarnish the Schneider's name.
Kenny, misunderstanding again, made another odd remark. Right? We can't have a criminal in the family, right, bro? So, let's keep things calm. We'll save money together as a couple and pay back little by little. At Kenny's nonsensical interpretation, even my uncle was left speechless, not knowing how to respond. I felt that no matter what was said, it wouldn't resolve anything. So, I decided to fetch something from my room. Ever since the incident on the phone when Kenny was talking with a friend, I've had the business card of a divorce lawyer ready. Kenny, call this number. I want a relationship to be over. From now on, let's communicate through lawyers. When Kenny saw the business card I thrust at him, his face turned pale. Why? We're about to have a baby, and yet, why are you doing this? At that moment, I told everyone present what Kenny had been talking about with his friend on the phone. Wait, you heard that? It was just a joke.
You think that excuse will fly? I've known from the start that you approached me for my inheritance.
Everyone around was giving Kenny a cold stare. Realizing that there was no way out, Kenny retorted with a defiant attitude.
Darn! I thought I was gonna get close to $9 million. After we got married, I researched how much your mother left you.
Everyone was shocked by this sudden change in Kenny, who had always seemed so gentle. Maybe I should have been suspicious of a man I met at a dating event who was 10 years younger. I thought we had married for love, but this hurt me deeply. From now on, Kenny would be a stranger to me and my brother, so naturally, he had to pay back the money from selling the grand piano. Kenny broke down, saying, I can't do that. But all the relatives present would testify against him, so there was no escaping this. However, rest assured, I won't ask for child support. Really? Well, at least I'm grateful for that.
In return, Kenny, you'll have nothing to do with this child. This is my child alone. You can't even claim to be its father.
I firmly stated, with my hand on my belly.
So, I can't even see the child?
Of course not.
Someone who deceives others for money doesn't deserve to be a father.
Upon hearing this, Kenny looked devastated and collapsed. Since the divorce, Kenny had been living in poverty, working live-in jobs. One day, my phone rang, and it was Kenny. I didn't want to have anything to do with him, but he kept calling, so I reluctantly answered.
Rachel, please help me.
Kenny pleaded in a pitiful voice. He explained that the buyer of the grand piano he sold wanted to return it and get a refund. When Kenny sold the piano, he had said it was in pristine condition. However, there was a large engraving on the back made by my brother claiming ownership. Probably Kenny didn't check the back. He should have gone to a reputable piano buyer who would have checked it thoroughly. Kenny probably sold it through a shady dealer. He was likely lured in by tempting offers like completely free, and now he's facing the consequences. Kenny had to return $200,000 to the buyer. Considering what he owed my brother, it was a substantial amount. Later on, Kenny tried to file for bankruptcy, but my brother and I took legal action and stopped him. Now, Kenny is burdened with even more debt and works day and night doing manual labor. Eventually, the heirloom grand piano safely returned. Relieved, my brother put a strong lock on the room where the piano was kept. He even installed a security camera, being super cautious. "No one's gonna touch that piano till I start my piano lessons," said my brother, who hadn't changed a bit from when he was a kid, making me chuckle. My brother expressed his wish to start a piano school at our family home, so I decided to discuss sharing our mother's inheritance. Catherine, my brother's wife, had taken care of our mother, and I felt guilty about inheriting everything by myself. Thanks to my brother agreeing with my decision, it seems we'll continue to have a good relationship with his family in the future. And so, I was blessed with a long-awaited baby girl. I feel bad for the relatives who were hoping for an heir, but in today's age, I believe girls tend to cherish their mothers for a longer time. Besides, my mother, in fact, was an only daughter and took in a son-in-law, so if needed, my daughter can do the same. I became a single mom, but Catherine, who's already done with her parenting, is fully supporting me. Ever since I was taking care of my mom, I've truly been indebted to Catherine. My brother said he's gonna step in as a father figure for my daughter, and he's really excited about it. Also, my brother and Catherine have 2 adult daughters, and under his influence, who loves the piano, both became kindergarten teachers. Those nieces have also come to adore my daughter. I feel so fortunate to be supported by such a warm family. And with gratitude to those around me, I intend to live strong with my daughter.